Greetings, traveler. Recently I made a video where I shared a very simple question-based framework for how to construct a story for basically any game. A traveler called GuyFox8919 asked a question. He said, which questions as you the DM had to answer before every session in a D&D campaign, before the campaign, and which were answered during the sessions based on this framework? Did you brought the last question in play by literally describing the aftermath of an encounter or story arcs? Maybe you could make a video where you demonstrate how you prep for a campaign or a session using this questionnaire. So let's do that today. So today what I want to do is quickly give you a run through of the framework I'm talking about again, in case you didn't see the previous video. And I'm going to talk about how we apply this framework in two axes. One is on the group level, so how the group progresses through the storyline in this campaign, and also on the character level, because each individual character has their own motivations and their own way they're approaching this story. Also, what I want to do is talk about, for the character case, how each character's individual background affects how they come into the overall story and how we handle that during a D&D session. So one also quick note before we start, this is in the context of D&D, but I have used it for making stories for video games as well. So because this framework is so flexible, you can use it for many things. You can use it for books or short stories or videos or many other mediums as well. So let's start. If you don't know who I am, my name is Xanthos. I've been making video games for the last 14 years. Professionally, I've been playing D&D for about 30 years now. So in the previous video, we discussed this method of asking simple questions to construct the story for a game, in this case for a D&D campaign. Why do we do this? In my experience, if I just made a story about something that happened, like, for example, a dragon attacks a city, that's got some basic interest as a simple storyline, but I always felt that saying something simple like that left me wanting more in terms of story, and the same for my players. So I heard of this framework where we ask these questions, and each one of them is important for bringing the story together and getting the players engaged in the story. So very quickly, what this framework is about is basically asking first where the story is taking place. When is it taking place? These questions basically place us in space and time and make this relevant to the players by means of either talking about a real place and a real timeline, so players can relate to it based on their real world knowledge, or saying that this is in a fantasy world and players perhaps are interested in this fantasy world, so this is why they should be interested in this kind of story as well. Then is the who part. So here we can be talking about a single character, a group of characters, or even something that's not human at all. Maybe we're talking about a mountain, maybe we're talking about a village, maybe we're talking about a whale. So the who is again very flexible, and it's the main point that we want to revolve the story around. So the next question is what. So what did that entity want to do? What was its desire? Why did it want to do that? What was the reason that it wanted to do this task? What means? Next is, what means did this entity use to achieve the goal, to solve the what? So for the how part, it's really important to talk about the failed attempts. This is very, very crucial, and it's a major point I missed during my earlier attempts at making stories like that. So to give you a quick bad example, if we say there was a locked door and the adventurer searched for the key and they found them and they opened the door. There is no information being transmitted to the listener here. There is nothing interesting about this story. After hearing this story, the listener doesn't feel empowered with knowledge that can help him in the future. But if we describe all the problems the hero in the story had and how they solved each one of these problems and eventually managed to get to the solution of the story, that's traditionally much more interesting in stories, and it makes the listener feel like they gained something, they gained experience while listening to this story. What was the outcome of this? Typically the outcome is that the hero succeeds, or the subject of our story succeeds, but it can even be about the hero not succeeding and actually failing, and that being a lesson in its own, right? Perhaps the hero tried to resurrect the dead only to find out it's impossible. So that tells us something about that situation. And finally, and this is what really closes up the story, if a movie or a game or something doesn't do this last step, it feels sort of like a cliffhanger ending. It feels like there's more to follow and it hasn't been said. It feels like all the loose ends are not tied up in the end. So by change we mean after going through all this, how did the main character change? So did he learn from his adventures, or did he stay stubborn and continue on his ways? Did something that happened change a habit of his, or a belief of his, or his situation in any way? Or did he go through all of this basically completely unchanged? Again, there is no right and wrong here, but by describing this point at the end and very clearly focusing on the outcome of all this for the character, we can gain information about that character's personality and how they deal with all the experiences they have in the world. So I know this is really general, so we're gonna jump into an example. And this example is from the Dungeons & Dragons campaign that I played for my players with the purpose of building a world for the video game that we're developing right now. So as a side note, if you're interested in that, if you want to give us feedback about what you think about this kind of world, and if you want to ask questions about the game, please use the link down below to book a meeting with me. So anyway, and I'm going to split it in two because, like I said, the group part is something that I prepared before the campaign even started. So when I created the world and I thought, okay, this is what the world looks like, this is what's special about this world, what sort of adventure do I imagine the players having here? I had to come up with the general structure of the story before I knew who's going to be the player, how big the group is going to be, what classes they're going to choose, what origins they're going to choose, and so on. So this is mostly information that I prepared before the campaign. The character information here is something that is obviously very much affected by the overall story of the campaign, but it is modified because each character has their own background and motives, and how they play in the campaign evolves as the campaign goes on, right? You don't know beforehand exactly what the characters are going to do in the campaign. That's the beauty of D&D. You get to discover the story as it happens. So let's talk first about the group. And sorry for the small letters here, there's a lot of information to go through, so I'll be reading over everything, hopefully make it more clear. So for the group, where are we? We are in a campaign setting called the Blue Wasteland. I made a video some time ago, so if you're really interested in that, I'll leave a link down below so you can check it out. Specifically, inside that world, we are in one of the, let's say, nations called the Karakoram Consortium. So after giving an introduction about the world to the players, then I had the players choose one of the main nations they can all belong to, and they all needed to be in the same nation in order to do this adventure together. Since all the nations are pretty cut off from each other, having the players start at the same place was really important. So after describing the general landscape in the world, telling the players where this adventure starts is important to place them in a cultural and geographical setting. Next is when. So this is where we talk about the point in time. Because I generally spoke about the timeline in the world, and that timeline is different from the timeline we use in the real world, that immediately tells the players that that world is different from what we know from the real world. It shifts in their mind how they perceive the world, and what pre-existing knowledge that they already have in their head they can use for this world because they think it would apply here as well. So the timeline is 312 rotations after, and this is after the last Great War. Lots of backstory, let's not go into it here, but anyway, that's the timeline. That's the equivalent of AD or BC from the real world. So next is who we're talking about. The group is very different, but essentially they're all retired soldiers or retired members from various organizations inside this nation. Next is what they're trying to do. In this case, the objective is quite simply kill a dragon, but perhaps more important than what the objective is why they want to achieve this objective. And the reality is they don't. The players themselves have no desire to go after this dragon. And by dragon here, in this world, we don't necessarily mean a dragon in the classic D&D setting as a red dragon, blue dragon, and so on. In this world, since this is a post-apocalyptic type of setting where technology and science has regressed compared to the world as we know it today, also certain mutations have taken place to change the animals of this world, sometimes pretty dramatically. And some of the more dramatic mutations end up in these huge aberrations, monsters essentially, that some of them live in the sea, some of them can fly in the sky. Because they look so weird, people in this world generally refer to them as dragons. So it's a blanket term, and it's a little different from a classic D&D setting. So one of them has attacked the nation that the players belong to, and a member of the government is tasked with finding a way to make sure that that dragon doesn't attack the city again. In fact, the players will be part of the attack. That's how they get introduced into the story, and they experience the destructive power of this creature, and each one for their own motives will be involved in the effort to defeat this creature to make sure it doesn't attack the city again and cause all this damage. And that's the reason why they have to kill this dragon. How are they going to kill it? And here, it's very important to go through the steps we mentioned. So if the players simply met the dragon, killed the dragon, and we're done in a single encounter of the first session of the campaign, then it feels more like the combat is the main point of this campaign rather than showing off the world and using basically all of these things as an excuse to show the players more of the world and more of the interesting parts of it. Now, of course, this is not the main point of the campaign, to show off the world, but the more you get to share all these background details, the more the players feel at place in the world feels more authentic, and the more they learn information about the world, so how creatures behave, how the nations behave, what resources are available, and so on, they can use these resources or this information in the strategies they come up with to deal with the problems in this world. And using solutions that are unique to this world just makes the game feel all the more authentic, and the players feel the pleasure of leveraging rather the knowledge they gained about this world and turning that into power, which is generally a satisfying feeling. So here we have to talk about what they tried to do and how the first solutions they tried failed. So in this case, when the dragon attacked the city, the city of course had its defenses, and it managed to repel the dragon, but not before the dragon did significant damage to the city. And repelling the dragon of course didn't mean killing the dragon, which meant that the dragon could return anytime in the future for another attack. Also, eventually the players managed to confront the dragon in direct combat, only to find out that such a big and powerful creature is too strong to be defeated by conventional means. So just stabbing it with a sharp thing or shooting it with a little pistol didn't really do anything to kill it, basically. And that was another encounter that needed to happen to show the players the power of this creature and how conventional solutions wouldn't work. Now, a delicate point here is to say that, well, even in this encounter where ultimately they couldn't defeat the dragon, they shouldn't be left with nothing. They should definitely get experience for going against such a powerful creature. They were rewarded with materials and chunks they managed to cut off the dragon, or things they found, stuck in its body and so on. And overall, even if the overall mission is a failure, supposedly, the encounter is still a success because they learned information about their target and they gained experience in terms of experience points for the characters to level up, and they gained useful items to equip their characters with. And finally, the final way to truly defeat the dragon would be to obtain an airship, because airships are very important for traveling in this world. Outfit it in such a way that it would withstand all the standard dragon attacks. At least it would give them a fighting chance before the airship was destroyed. So they had to upgrade the ship, they had to improve its structural rigidity, its armor, its firepower, and finally find a cannon so big and so powerful, and find fuel and ammunition and so on that would be so extremely powerful that could even defeat such a crazy, dangerous, large creature as dragon here. So it's important to go through at least these 3 steps. Actually, there were a couple more of extra steps when we actually got to play the story, but these are the main nodes that I want to mention here. The siege happened, but it didn't defeat the dragon. Players tried direct combat, but that didn't defeat the dragon. And finally, equipping the airship and making sure it had this massively powerful cannon was necessary to eventually defeat the dragon. Now, this is still part of the information that I prepared before the campaign. So, what would be the outcome? Here, again, perhaps the players would act in a very foolish way, and perhaps they would all perish in the attempt of defeating this dragon, but I had to prepare for both eventualities, whether the players defeated the dragon or were defeated by the dragon. So eventually the players did manage to defeat the dragon. That had a big effect on the airship. They were flying, the cannon itself was completely destroyed in the process, but the mission was a success, so that was the important point of that. And finally, we come to the change. So how did that change the group and ultimately the country that tasked them with, the nation that tasked them with defeating this dragon? Well, during their adventures, they had the options to explore the areas outside of their nation, which is traditionally a very difficult task in this world because of all the monsters and all the adversity in the world. Also, most of the world is covered in water, so traveling is generally very difficult. But because the players managed to find an airship, they did a lot of adventuring like that. Eventually they came in contact with other nations, and there they had I designed the story in such a way where they had the opportunity to decide how they want to interact with the nations they find. Do they want to have a conflict with them? Do they want to cooperate? Do they want to basically completely avoid them? There were several options that I prepared ahead of time for dealing with that. So again, this is a very important thing for the group, so the nation of the players by extension, and for the players individually, right? So for the nation, ending up in conflict with the K9 Machinarium, which is another nation, was a significant step politically and for the future of this world in general. So this is the this was the culmination of the adventure. That yes, of course, they didn't manage to defeat the dragon, but they also are now in conflict with the K9 machinarium. So again, this is not necessarily a super bad thing, because in this world nothing is black and white, everything is gray. So on one hand, conflict is bad. On the other, perhaps the players were not happy with what that other nation was doing and they thought it should be stopped. Also, there's the question of resources. So perhaps by defeating this nation, they can gain the resources and increase their power and ultimately achieve the goal of the nation they belong to. But basically, having this part to wrap up the story in the end is important to show what was the point of all this adventure beyond the obvious, defeating the dragon. And it also hints at how the story could proceed in the future if we choose to play another campaign in this world. So that's it for the group part, and now let's talk a little bit about the characters. So when talking about the character backgrounds and the character stories, it is super helpful to reference this part of the player's handbook. So this is page 127, and it talks about the personality traits, the ideals, the bonds, and the flaws of the characters. Now, when I first saw this part of the player's handbook for this edition of D&D, I was surprised to see it there, because I thought, well, every character can create their own background, right, and their own ideals and so on. But then I read how this system ties into the inspiration system of 5th edition, and I thought, well, indeed, if the character acts according to their beliefs and their background and so on, then that indeed helps the game, and it should deserve the inspiration reward. But also then I remembered how sometimes when working particularly with new players to D&D, it's difficult to have them imagine all these details about their characters, right? For new players, it's difficult enough to create a character, learn about the classes, decide which class, which weapons, like which spells and all these things. So that's already a daunting experience. So having those ideals and personality traits and so on in an easy list to choose from essentially gives the character a direction to go towards. And also because there is the bonds section there, so there is something they want to someone they want to protect, there is some person important to them, some faction important to them, and so on. If the story introduces that faction, and if that faction is in danger, or that person is in danger, or that person requires the character's assistance, it follows logic that since that's their background, that's their belief, they should act to protect that character. So this is very easy to give characters a reason to do all these things. Otherwise, I found that sometimes characters might encounter a task or a quest inside the campaign and think, why should I care, essentially. So this system is really really helpful in this case. So of course the characters in our campaign had all their motivations and backgrounds and so on, but that is their own background before getting introduced to this story. So what I'm going to do is talk about just one of the characters in our group and what their background story was and how that character interacted with the overall story in the campaign. So where did this character's story begin in this campaign? It started it happened in a city tavern. So that was the first scene that this character was involved in. When was this? So this was during a meeting with an old friend. There's no point to talk about this general timeline again because it has already been introduced. So this is the current year for all the players. So during a meeting with an old friend, our character, who is a retired ballista operator, so he used to be part of the military in this nation, talks with his friend, and his friend realizes, which is an NPC in this case, that after retiring from the military, this character is having, let's say, financial difficulties. He's barely scraping by. So even though she was tasked with being part of this group to eventually defeat the dragon, she sees his situation and she takes out her invitation letter to join this group, which thankfully was nameless, and says, look, I got this invite. Would you be interested in doing this task instead of me? If so, you can just show up in this office and get a briefing about it. So because we have established through the background of the character and their current story and their current situation that they're having, let's say, financial difficulties, and this mission offers a reward, of course, then it makes logical sense for this character to at least be interested in this. So that is how this particular character gets introduced into the main story. Because of their own unique personal motivation, they get involved in this story. And of course, this is not the only story this character is working on, right? This character is also trying to sort out things in their own lives, which again functions on exactly the same structure here, but it's something that's happening at the same time as all the rest of the story. So I'm not going to go into that, but basically you can have multiple of these stories running at multiple parallel axes during your campaign. So anyway, how is the character going to solve this problem? How are they going to try to defeat this dragon using their own tools? So this character's tools are basically his combat skills. So he does use his combat skills during the siege and during direct combat and so on, but he finds out that it's not enough essentially to defeat the dragon. So he comes upon this obstacle time and time again that shows him that all his expertise up to now can get him up to a certain point in achieving his goal and getting the money and getting out of his difficulties, but it's not quite enough. So in a very, very interesting turn of events, this particular character uses his combat skills and uses the experience he had up to now as a vehicle operator, where he was the ballista operator on top of. He uses that background to, quite surprisingly, both to me and to everyone in the group, and probably for the character himself, he finds a large bird that was part of the initial attack of the dragon to the nation. He chooses to grapple with the bird, capture the bird, and instead of killing it, try to tame it and eventually turn it into a mount. Now, this was completely unforeseen for me. I had no idea that the character would even think of doing that, but it was 100% genuine. That character thought that, this is a unique resource. Also, birds in this particular world and for this particular nation are considered, let's say, kind of like holy beings or very respected beings. So killing it wasn't really a good option, but letting it just fly away and attack again wasn't a good option for the character. So this character thought, well, what if we could work together? So that was a really cool emergent storyline that we followed. So using that experience and that background, that character learned how to fly and how to fight from the back of this large bird. And when the time came to shoot the cannon and defeat the dragon that way, his role was on the bird, basically distracting the dragon and bringing him just at the right place so that the cannon could shoot and defeat the dragon. So his skill was very much instrumental in the ultimate outcome of this campaign. And finally, after the campaign was a success and the dragon was killed and the story was wrapping up, we come to this part, which again is super important. We couldn't just stop the session where we said, okay, the campaign is finished, the dragon is dead, thank you guys, have a good night. That would feel strange, right? You want to know what was the outcome of it. Like, was the nation happy that they succeeded at the mission? Did they think that, of course it was expected of them, then they shouldn't expect a reward? Or was there a big celebration? We want to wrap it up. We want to show how these things happen, to show the impact of the player's actions in the game world. So, of course, the character got plenty of money to achieve his goal here of getting out of his troubles. On top of that, he got recognition. So one of these characters' side tasks, let's say, was to sort out the situation of his dishonorable discharge back when he was part of the military. This was something that this character was trying to come to terms with, and this character wasn't happy about all that, and he wished he could do something about it, but before this whole story happened, he felt powerless to do. So this was an excellent method of getting recognition from the nation, and not just recognition, but reinstatement into his previous position, which was, of course, something really important to the character. So yes, this whole story was about killing a dragon, but to this character none of this makes sense. He doesn't care about the dragon, he doesn't care about the nation, he cares about his own status, right? And of course every character cares about themselves and how the world changes in relation to themselves. So this was this character's own story, and this is how the general story helped him wrap up his own personal objective. So this is a run through of about 2 years worth of a campaign, and how this framework stayed at the side of the campaign the whole time. An interesting point to say here is that we don't have to do all of this on the first session or the first 5 minutes of a campaign, but it's always the framework that guides us through it. And as a closing remark for how these stories work, I always think about the manga Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind by Hayao Miyazaki, of course. The manga is quite different from the movie, if you happen to have seen it, and I don't want to spoil anything, and so I'll just say that at the end of the manga, which is much longer story-wise than the movie, he leaves it with saying, you know, I have to stop this story because all these characters are so interesting and they all have so many stories to tell, all the characters that appear in the story, that I could just keep on writing this story forever, because new characters get introduced, new objectives exist for every character, all the characters interact with each other, so every character has to react to what everybody else is doing and what the world is doing and so on. So once you realize the power of this framework, the story not only can become infinite, but it can become infinitely interesting. Because as soon as we're talking about relatable characters, we care about them. We want to know what happened to them. We want to make sure that they were fine, that they managed to achieve their goals. Or if they're evil characters, we want to make sure that justice is served, that the characters are doing the right thing in the world, that, you know, all the ideals the characters are serving are brought to reality, and so on. So if you have time to check it out, I really recommend it. Anyway, that's the quick run through. Hopefully this puts this framework in a bit more of context for how it works during a D&D campaign. This is how we use it in our campaign, and I know this is just 2 years of storyline and side quests compressed into however many minutes this video is, but if you have questions, if I can answer something about this framework, please let me know. I'll do my best. So that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, have fun.